Welcome back to the plenary after an hour of refreshment, but my impression was that you have used it to go on discussing the issues, which is also very good. My name is Manfred Konochiewicz. I used to work for the German Ministry for Development Cooperation until recently, and my main occupation is now that I'm the co-chair of the board of the Green Climate Fund, a fund that was founded by the Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC to fund climate-related investments in mitigation and adaptation in developing countries, obviously very pertinent to the issues that we discussed today. So I'm looking at all these soil issues mainly from the angle of climate, which is obviously also very relevant. Today is the day to understand better soils, to understand noise in the Nexus. And we've been through the morning sessions that have helped us to understand better, and we've been through the various events in the afternoon. And tonight at this plenary, we want to bring all this together again. The key question is, what is the role of soils in the nexus of water, food, and energy security? What is the role of soils? What does losing ground imply for this nexus? And the way the organizers have put this together is that we have a panel here, and the panel is here sitting on the stage with panelists who are familiar with one or more knots in this nexus. And I will introduce them later, because first we will do something else. We will link the outcome of today's meetings with an important product that is to come out of this conference, the Agenda for Action, this document. And you have it in your folder, and you may have read it already. So this is one product that we are working for, and of course the question will be, what can we contribute from all those meetings for this Agenda for Action? To help us do this, we have the 4 thread ambassadors, one for each of the 4 threads of the conference. And the question to them is, what is the conclusion of what you have heard today in your thread for the Agenda for Action? They are all sitting here, and I will call them to the here to this podium. After that, we will hear the reflections of the panelists. And after that, I sincerely hope that we have time for questions and answers and for some discussions here from the plenary. So without much further introduction, I would like to invite the first thread ambassador, Professor Ratan Lal, to come up here. Our ambassador, His Excellency Ratan Lal, our ambassador for material cycles. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. That was the newest introduction I ever had. I want to say the easy thing first. The people who prepared this report was not me. They are Kirti, Klaus, Pam, Rebecca, Francis, Franca, and Francisca. They did the hard work, so they deserve all the commendation. My second easy comment is that I want to congratulate and thank the organizer for an excellent second week. The comments that I was given was what was the surprising in the discussion. And in terms of soil pollution, the surprising things were the lack of or the need for transparency, and that the fact that soil diffuse pollution is a problem. Another surprising thing that came up was that the monitoring is needed of the organic chemicals or organic pollutants, and a program is needed to do that. And another important part was that how to fund this. and how can the soil directive be implemented through what funding sources. The similar kind of surprising in the soil carbon, and I'm going to go back and forth between those two, that many felt that the global approaches versus developing countries, that why, if the problem is so severe in the developing countries, why not really focus in the developing countries itself? And we do not always need to enhance carbon, but only the no-till system does not always enhance its carbon, but on the surface layer. So many people felt that that was a surprising, that the total carbon gain in the no-till was not there. It is only in the surface layer that happens. Then should the organic carbon be preserved in the soil, what we already have, or should it be enhanced? That was, according to them, another thing. Personally, I may not agree with everything what I'm saying, but that's what they give it to me. And if there are discussions, I'll come back to those points myself. To protect the high impact area, such as tropical rainforest and such as wetland and so forth, and the fact that the land tenure, that a farmer does not have the land and therefore they do not care about it, was something that came out as surprising. The second question, Mr. Chairman, that I was asked to address, and the colleague which I had named already gave me the information, was what are the new and promising approaches? And again, first to the soil pollution part, they thought that the new and promising approach was monitoring program, development of the monitoring program in relation to ecosystem health. The ecosystem health, such as soil quality, such as ecosystem functions and so forth. Not simply human health, but the ecosystem health. In terms of the soil organic carbon group, they came up with several new and promising issues, such as what the role of soil scientists, or of the scientists. Are they mediators? They filter the knowledge, they amplify the knowledge, and then communicate the knowledge to the policymakers. Should they create short fact sheets or video programs or communication channels so that they can communicate that knowledge to the policymakers? Inform the policymakers of certain things that they know for sure, so that they do not give conflicting views. So the surety part is very important. Landscape level, that the soil carbon should be monitored at a landscape level rather than at policy level. By the way, that was the common point between both the diffuse pollution as well as the soil carbon. The funding of carbon credits was something which was very important. Two specific examples came up. One was Campinas, and the other was the Iceland program that they have developed, the Soil Conservation Service, which, by the way, is the oldest service in the world. The Soil Conservation Service in the US started in 1937 and in Iceland 1907. I think informing the policymakers of the exact information that we know, rather than saying on the one hand rather than the other hand, that was something very, very important part. Global carbon stewardship. I thought personally that was a very good concept that they came up with, that if carbon can be considered as a global stewardship. My personal view is that on the one hand we talk about the poor countries, and then we talk about stewardship. When a stomach is hungry, the stewardship sometimes does not mean very much. Think about that part. They said the third question that we were asked to address was the disagreements. So I'll first go to the pollution part. What was the disagreement? Who pays? Should be business, should be industry, should be government. And I think that comes back to the implementation part. The other part disagreement was the diffuse versus the point source pollution, non-point versus the point source pollution. I think those are the couple of disagreements. In terms of the soil carbon, once again they had a longer list. One is the benefits resulting from peatland re-wetting. Would there be more problem of methane emission? Would there be more problem of nitrous oxide emission? Would there be more problem of eutrophication of phosphorus, for example? And long-term contract for 30 to 50 years, how to manage that, how to implement it. Should the term soil organic carbon be used, or soil organic matter, or should something that farmer understand or relate to, such as soil organic matter content or soil quality or yield stability or yield reliability or soil resilience, should they be used? I think the question concerning the no-till, whether no-till really sequester carbon or not, that certainly was a point which came up as a content of disagreement. Using carbon rather than storing carbon. There was a very good article on that by Henry Jensen, hoarding carbon versus using carbon. That's a long debate, and I think the group came up with that again today. Is it necessary to measure carbon on every piece of land? Or can some surrogate method be used to use it? I think that was another point of discussion. What is a healthy soil? Does a healthy soil mean what kind of microbes, what kind of organism it can sustain, and so forth? A couple of points which came up on both parts, and I'm going to address them jointly. Sustainability versus economics. Is economic myopic? Is sustainability long term? Is there a meeting ground between them somewhere? I think that's a very important one. Sustainability in a developed country versus developing country. The problems are different, solutions are different. And defining a healthy soil. Healthy for what? Healthy for who? Is for human or is for the ecosystem as a whole? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Professor Lal. The next ambassador is Ephraim Konya, as you know, from Senior Research Fellow from IFCA. He's our ambassador for international soil policy. And I should mention that we have asked all the participants to stick to 5 minutes. There is a very discreet reminder here that you can use. And thank you to Professor Lal for being so short and succinct. Yes. Thank you.
I have 3. Which one do I present all of them? I have 3 sessions, so I present all of them.
Thank you. I'm going to start the presentation with the ELD, Economics of Land Degradation. What was the most surprising thing in the session was about the language that we use to communicate the results, the scientific results that we have. What kind of language can we use? That was a surprising thing to see that if we use the language of the scientists with statistical significance and all that, the policymakers who make decisions will not understand a single word. And that was the surprising thing. And the other one was about that within ourselves, scientists, we have different languages. The soil scientists, they have their language, economists have their languages, and they have 2 hands. On one hand, the other hand. And those languages within the scientists themselves is a very big problem. Now, where any new promising approaches are looked at into this session, yes, there was. One of those things was the participatory economic land degradation. The participatory approach is that something which is new, and it was discussed during this session. There was also the focus on macroeconomics. If we talk the language, that language of economics of land degradation, and we just look at one plot site, the policymakers who make decisions may not understand that. We have to look at the macroeconomics, the impact of macroeconomics, and that's when we'll raise the eyebrows. And then there was the importance of the urban soils, that we think that maybe there is nothing which is going on in the urban areas and it affects land degradation. Yes, there is, and we need to talk about that. And then there was also the question of, was there any formal disagreement? Of course, there was, and as you saw from the beginning, the surprising facts is that there are many things that we can evaluate. For example, when you say economics of land degradation, people would only understand that, oh, these are the things that are sold and bought from the market. But when we say economics of land degradation, we are very broad, including things that are not sold or bought from the market. On the second thread, which was get it, use it, it was about the soil information. The most surprising thing from this session was we have very few countries with soil information in the world. And this also surprised me a lot. I thought it was only in Africa, but actually quite a lot of countries do not have the soil information that this program was discussing about. And there was also a problem about standardization. There are many methods of standardizing, many methods which each of the information that we can get from the soil are documented and standardized. That's something which was also surprising. Now, on issues of the new issues that have been discussed, there was the issue that AFSIS, which is the Africa Soil Information System, it has developed a system in Africa, a place where there is quite a lot of data need. It has developed a system which is very nice and very robust, and it is giving recommendations on fertilizer and other things around the sentinel sites it has selected to collect data and then interpolate the data from such sites. And also about what, if any, disagreement. There was disagreement about standardization of the data that is collected, and also the issue which was a link between information system and the end users. Who's going to be using the information that is collected from the soil? A good example is about the soil biology. Who is going to be using that information? And we know that that is a lot of information that's required. And another thing which I wouldn't, it is not in my script, but I attended the session, and the presenter said that below the ground, where we bury the dead, there is more life than above the ground. It surprised me. The last session was about towards EU legislative framework for soils. The surprising thing here was something which was talked about in the plenary session in the morning via the video. There has not been action for this framework, even though it has been there for a long time. And there was also a risk of that the money is going to be withdrawn. Another thing which was surprising was, guess which country is against this? I was actually hesitating very much to state this because that country is Germany. But I was informed that all the people who are in this room, they support this framework. So I said, I'll say it, I'm not going to be deported. So were there any new promising approaches that have been discussed? This was about the legal framework. There are many countries in the EU region, and there are legal frameworks. There are many priorities in each of those countries, and then there is a need of discussing this. And that the loss of land degradation in the European Union is 38 billion euro. That's very, very big loss, which is something that needs to be looked at. And then there is also a need of improving democracy. Many people in many countries will have different demands and needs. And now there is also a need of having democracy in this framework. And then the thing that, what's the future? What's the future holding for us? There is also need of establishing qualitative targets at the EU level, and also the interpretation of the subsidiarity principle that each of the countries will have different approaches to these issues. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Ephraim. And our next thread ambassador is Ambassador for Responsible Land Governance, Joan Kuka Kagwanya. She is Chief of the African Land Policy Initiative from the UN Commission for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so sorry I only have 5 minutes, because that's as long as I will have to be an ambassador. So I wish you'd have given me a little longer. I like being an ambassador because of the protocols that surround that. You have a whole team to work with you, and all you have to do is represent a certain team. You don't have to do the work. Maybe not. Maybe that's not what ambassadors do. But it was a pleasure for me to be ambassador for the team, and a very, very able team. Thank you to the chairs, Bettina, Christine, and others who worked with us to put this together. So an interesting topic, one that is close to my heart. What was surprising, not to myself, but to everybody, was, at least for me, I was surprised by the richness of the perspectives that we were able to put together today. And I think that speaks a lot for this, the organizers, and what they were able to bring together. We had private sector, somebody who was not scared of civil society, made their case, and I think we are all sold, we are all investing in land. The private investment that the amount of land in some of these countries that is under investment, according to the data we had, is amazing. Some countries at 70% of the agricultural land. I think that was quite amazing. And the fact that as farmers actually have the biggest investments in agricultural investments, that's the biggest proportion. It's not your foreign investments coming almost last, and then obviously your public sector may be coming second. So a lot of people expected that with all the hula baloo around this, there's a lot of investments going around, but most of it is actually by farmers, local farmers themselves. A little bit surprising, I think, to some is that this is happening in a space where there are really no rules as such, in the sense that the governance of most of the land, which is under customary systems, especially in parts of Africa, is not really represented under the statutory governance under which all this is occurring, even in the land sector. So it's a little bit, it's all happening where you have not documented the claims well, where the land is not secured, where I think the land use plans are not there. So it's really like a lottery kind of, let's go here and then you go and do it. And that there is no political space, in the political space at least, we are not seeing the nexus around land issues, including soils. So if I take the example of Africa, you have the CADIP Pillar 1 that has some soil land management issues, but then there is no linkage really to the governance system per se within which this is occurring. And then what I found surprising myself, and I'm sure others mentioned it, is the lack of mention of the African land policy guidelines themselves. So I work for an African institution that is of the African Union and 3 organizations that is actually trying to advance the AU framework and guidelines, and there is not much mention of it at this level. What was a little bit promising in terms of what is promising are some approaches. A lot was mentioned about the voluntary guidelines and the fact that they do provide us with a basis to be able to get some tools together to improve the land governance in terms of investments, and building synergies with the African framework and guidelines, which I'm trying to do with the FAO, for instance. There are some, we do have some hope, and then drawing from others, the responsible agricultural investments, ongoing debate right now, some of the OECD practice in this area and the World Bank, and obviously the F&G themselves. We had a little bit about new investment models. Our private sector perspective brought an interesting perspective of local investors partnering with foreign ones. I found it quite interesting that there was a target to Africans living abroad who happen to own land and also have money, and so they are able to invest, and so foreign investors targeting this group and having partnerships with them. And I found that to be actually something I haven't heard about, and I thought it was quite interesting. I live abroad, so please think of me. I do have some land too, and a little bit of money, very little. In terms of some other reflections on other systems that have worked and some entry points, there was a good perspective there in terms of, if you look at the WTO and where we are today and the compliance mechanisms that we have today, it wasn't like that many years ago. So we should not give up. And there are entry points, even within the common agricultural programs. I can see my time is coming to an end. And we mentioned the need for data, though, but some experience is there with climate smart approaches, which can be useful. In terms of some areas of disagreement, there are not too many. We were very agreeable with each other. But it was actually a common one. We are not sure whether large-scale land-based acquisitions are acceptable to all. There was a lot of discussion as to whether they are good means of achieving food security, for instance, but I'm not sure whether we really agreed. Another area is who should set the rules for this to occur, and where does the accountability lies in terms of who enforces it. And then finally, what is the role of these soft approaches of standards like the VGs and how useful they are, especially if they are not well domesticated or if the situation at national level in terms of governance is not welcoming of these kinds of approaches. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. And our next thread ambassador is Liesel Wiese. She's our ambassador for sustainable land management and soil engineering. Please, Liesel.
Thank you, and I think similar to the other thread ambassadors, it's an honor to be here. I think especially on the first day where this is a bit of a trial session to see how the system works, and I think you can be commended for introducing the system. First, I want to create context of where this thread fits into the soil nexus, and especially understanding soils within the nexus. I think where this thread is maybe a little bit different is the one topic was understanding mining and extractive industries within or as a soil land use, and also looking at urbanization and the land take versus using brownfields for additional development. So I also want to acknowledge the teams that are working with me, or that I was working with rather, Matthias, Maranay, and Carlos from the mining group, and Tando, York, and Sunday from the land take group. So basically, soil uses that don't promote food, water, energy, synergy is these two topics, because there's an economic perspective in terms of global domestic product production, and there's also the issue of urbanization. So increasing population is going to force increased economic growth and also urbanization. So we changed the report back from the three questions to just focusing on what the main questions are that we think should be addressed in the SDGs. Because there are always the issues that are easier to address and easier to find agreement on, but there are always the tough questions that we need to sort out. So we decided to focus on reporting back on those tough questions. So from the mining industry, we have 3 issues, and from the urbanization land take area, we have 4 issues. So I will start with the land take. Firstly, as I said, in terms of population growth, the urbanization is a key driver for economic and social development, so it's inevitable. We have to address this in the SDGs. Then urbanization has basic needs in terms of the inhabitants. So there can be a lot of synergy in terms of addressing urbanization and linking that with general societal needs such as water supply, sanitation, and so on. So the positive spin-offs should be considered as well. And then we shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel and change everything. We should consider the existing opportunities that are there, whether it's funding mechanisms, whether it's existing systems that can be linked to existing institutions, etc. It should be a synergistic approach. Then the last one is, I think, a very important one, is the cost-benefit analysis. And I think it was mentioned this morning as well. The financial cost of rehabilitating brownfields and then the development cost versus the environmental cost and ecosystem service cost of using greenfields and the loss in production potential, whatever soil potential was inherent in those systems. And a much greater cost, or a very important cost, should be linked to greenfields, that it is not necessarily financial. And we might find that developing brownfields might actually be less costly than greenfields. Then moving to the land uptake, I think I'll finish just in time. A very contentious issue was the issue of political will, which is essential in terms of the implementation of SDGs generally. And there was a disagreement in terms of what should come first, the development goals or the implementation plan or the political will. So that is a question I'm leaving with the floor. Should we continue with the development of plans in terms of developing political will, or should we sit back and wait for the political will to come and then plan accordingly? The second one is that on project level or individual mining level, the assessment system or the level of assessment has been well sorted out and is very effective. But the cumulative effect of those individual projects is not well assessed. And that's not only in terms of a national level, but also a regional and a global level. So the point was that there's not enough consolidation of and a systemic evaluation of the impact of mining on the soil in the Nexus. And then the last point is, why should we wait for rehabilitation of mined land to consider communities and integrate the communities with the rehabilitation efforts? Why not rather use integrated planning and integrate the communities in the mining practices and share the resources that are available through the mining practices, instead of excluding the communities and moving them away from the mining activities completely? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liesel. And to all ambassadors, thank you very much for being so disciplined in your presentation. You're excellent ambassadors, much better than the real diplomatic ambassadors that I've met throughout my professional life. They were rarely able to keep the time. So I think this is a wealth of results that we've heard. It won't be easy for the organizers to translate that into clear messages for the Agenda for Action, but we have 3 more days to go, right? So we will. I'm quite confident that we will focus and come to conclusions for the Agenda for Action as we go along. So the next part of this plenary tonight is that we will hear from our panelists. Here they're all, I shouldn't say experts, because they are more than experts, but they are very knowledgeable in their fields, and we have asked them to give the perspective from their fields from their professional fields. And I hope that you will also be able to find some link to the results that you've heard. I know it's a challenge. This is the first time that you have been confronted and made familiar with these outcomes. And it'll be interesting to hear from you. First, we hear from Anja Grobitsky. Anja is the executive secretary of the Global Water Partnership, I think, which is well known to most of us, if not all of us, and it's located in Sweden. Anja is clearly a water person, and I would like to ask, one of the questions where I would like to hear from you is, why are healthy soils crucial for fresh water, for clean fresh water, and for water security? I've heard over 20 years from the water community, water is very important. And of course it is, but perhaps you can give us some more sort of specific messages. Sort of what is the special role of water in this nexus? So, Anja, I'd like to ask you to come to the podium.
Thank you very much, Manfred. And I'd like to really thank the organizers of this superb conference. It's really dynamic, it's vibrant. It's just so wonderful to see a wide mix of people here with a mission. Everyone here has a mission, and it's really exciting to be here. There have been quite a few questions asked. What's the role of soils in the Nexus? What is the contribution of soil to water? I'd like to just maybe start by explaining where I come from. I'm actually from South Africa, though I'm based in Sweden right now. And growing up in South Africa, I became used to seeing landscapes where there were these gullies called dongas. And I accepted them as a natural part of the landscape, actually. It was only sometime later that I grew to understand that it was not inevitable, that it was linked, these dongas were linked to variable hydrology, deforestation, overgrazing, poverty issues, community issues. And fast forward a few decades. Just recently, I was in Tajikistan. They had an international conference on water cooperation there, a big push at the moment. But they took us to visit the Nurek Dam, which is the second highest dam in the world. And I found myself traveling through a landscape that really reminded me of South Africa, with these massive dongas. And it made me realize that really we're all connected by these issues. I assumed, not knowing a lot about Tajikistan, I've learned subsequently that 98% of the agricultural land in Tajikistan is degraded according to UNECE. But I assumed that actually this was ancient. This was an ancient landscape we were traveling through. I discovered that no, apparently it's happened since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it seems to be a disaster that perhaps rivals the disaster of the Aral Sea, which everyone has heard about. But it's the tragedy of the commons in Tajikistan. It's an issue of governance. And this is why I was so glad to see that governance was reflected in so many of the threads this afternoon. And there's really a huge challenge around developing this multi-level governance and the networks that are needed to start introducing better governance models. It's absolutely clear to me that better soil governance and management are essential for having more healthy water-based ecosystems. Where I come from, which is the Global Water Partnership, there's been a connecting thread for the last 15 years of the partnership that's been evolving, which is the issue of integrated water resources management, defined as the coordinated management of water, land, and related resources. Clearly, soil being one of those resources. Sediment in rivers is simply soil that's being transported. And it's absolutely critical both to the fertility of floodplains, the management of deltas, which is becoming a bigger and bigger issue with climate change issues. So I see these issues as being absolutely intertwined. I don't see that they can be separated. And we have to become much better at these multidisciplinary approaches, at thinking out of the box, out of our own particular box. And I think that introducing soils into this water, food, energy nexus is going to keep challenging people. You're going to have to keep explaining where you're coming from, but I think it's also very healthy because you're going to be challenging people to think about things from a different direction. So I'd say all strength to your elbow, please carry on doing it. Okay. Very briefly, I'd like to emphasize our tremendous support for the establishment of the Global Soil Partnership. We see these networks and partnerships for sustainable development as a really important model going forward, something that's been called for since the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992. And now we're really starting to see this coming to fruition with more and more partnerships being established. In terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, I was thrilled to see that, in fact, water is very much part of the set of targets that you have around land degradation. And I think there's a tremendous amount of joint work that we could do there. I would just like to say that one thing I haven't seen or heard in this conference, which I'd like to sort of urge you perhaps to get involved with, is that we're very involved with the disaster risk management community on working on a target around water and disasters, and in particular, drought issues. And what we're calling for is a target around reducing the deaths and economic losses related to disasters such as drought. And that may be something also that this community might want to pay attention to. So in conclusion, my time's up. Thank you very much, and I look forward to a dynamic discussion with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anja. And in case you haven't noticed, this conference is very water conscious. I haven't seen a bottle of water here yet. It's all tap water. And I think it would please very much my old friend Maggie Catley McCarlson, the second chair of the Global Water Partnership, who gets upset every time when a conference only serves bottled water. In fact, she refuses to enter a restaurant where tap water is not being served. So I think this is a good achievement here. Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Professor Reinhard Hüttel, a soil scientist, one of our leading soil scientists in Germany. And he works at the Helmholtz Center Potsdam, the German Research Center for Geoscientists. And I think you are looking at it from the very particular perspective of the soil science. So the soil science, what is in the top 100 centimeter of our Earth? I think an exciting issue. And I noticed that the carbon cycle in the soils has been figuring very much in the discussions today. Maybe you can tell us where the soil science stands and whether sort of soil science is already at a point where you can make definite statements about the relevance, or whether you need more research and data. Please.
Thank you very much. We certainly need more research and data. I can already conclude this. Thank you very much. I'm also very much delighted to be part of this process, a wonderful conference series, very active, and I cannot really tell you where soil science stands right now, but I try to give you some hints of what I think, and also related from what Ratan Lal told us just a minute ago. Well, the first point I would like to make is soils as a resource. And we are discussing it, for instance, now from the angle of bioeconomy. We want to replace crude oil by biomass as much as we can, and we need to feed a growing world population with increasing efforts and demands. So this, of course, is a stress or a strain for our soils, and we have created what we call soil functional concept. So soils, no matter what you do with them, have to fulfill certain functions. Of course, the protection function, the habitat function, the biology aspects, microbiology, and very important regulating functions. There are other functions, as we know, but these are, from my point of view, very important functions. No matter how intensive the question of biomass protection may be, these are important aspects. And of course, this is then related to what we just heard, water and energy in the context, for instance, for biofuels. And we have learned here in Germany, but also in Europe, we have been very progressive with biofuels. When you look at the whole arrangement, the comprehensive approach, it tells you that some of the ideas are probably not realistic. So it's a big challenge, and the challenge is soil fertility, soil quality, and sustainability of soils. Second aspect, soils and the carbon cycles. soils are different. This is sometimes not so clear. Think about permafrost or urban soils, or what we heard about mining operations and the resulting mining substrates, mining soils. But I would really like to go much deeper. Soils are not just 100 centimeters. From my perspective, they might go down to 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers. Why? Because that is where we find the deep biosphere. Deep biosphere is life in the crust. These microorganisms, bacteria, archaeads, tolerate temperatures of up to 110 degrees Celsius. And we think that this biomass is probably at least the same amount of biomass as on the Earth's surface. And we have to understand the connectivity. So we have the critical zone concept, but I would argue we have to really integrate geoscientific approaches with over, let's say, hydrological aspects, connectivity, seismology, but also these aspects of geopathology and eco-hydrology and so forth. So I think this is important aspect to go ahead with the critical zone concept to better understand these concepts. This would also then maybe add a little bit better to treatment of soils on an aspect like, are they now sinks or sources, for instance, for greenhouse gases? This would then be a good indication, for instance, for soil treatment for aspects like soil engineering. Another aspect, I think, which is very important is data. There is a need for much more information, data for sustainable soil management. So soil monitoring and the specific approaches for soil monitoring must be at our attention. And this is long-term monitoring. This is not very attractive for funding organizations, unfortunately, but without these kind of information, we cannot really overcome these demands that we have to understand the development of soils. So there are other approaches are needed, and this would also include remote sensing on all levels, airborne and satellite-based. And on satellite-based images, there is also an integration of optical systems and microwave or rather radar systems. But in any case, soils are, of course, a compartment in general of ecosystems. So we need the ecosystem approach when we try to establish these kind of monitoring systems. In particular, I would like to stress again soil biology, microbiology, the soil root interface. Roots are not just growing down to 1 meter, they might grow down much, much deeper, and this, of course, is then also, in one way or the other, a source of carbon, and to understand the soil organic matter, soil carbon, but also dissolved soil organic matter, dissolved soil carbon. And this, of course, would then also relate to soil pollution. We have just learned in Germany from the producers of mineral water that they are very much impacted now. Now that they have better analytical tools, they see that even in maybe 600 meters, 1,000 meters, 1,400 meters depths, they're now seeing substances probably coming from herbicides, pesticides, and so forth. So there is much more on the way down, deeper down into these kind of geological formations that we have to better understand. Yes, and we need this data for better information, for soil information, and for that matter, we would then need to find the right language to not only communicate amongst ourselves, between the scientists, but also to the general public and to the policymakers. I can, from my point of view, I see that there is progress in this context. At least the work that we do, for instance, in our academies nowadays, policy advice is possible. It's not an easy task, but to come up with the language that might be understood, at least at this end of the relationship. Germany was blamed of being, to say it friendly or diplomatically, reluctant with regard to the soil directive in Europe. That's obviously the case. However, Germany, at least within Europe, as far as I know, was the first country to establish a soil protection law. So we should take up this situation and also go forward with this concept in Europe, and from that on a worldwide basis. Soils are an essential resource for life. Life without soils is not possible, and they are as important as water, and therefore this nexus is very important, including plants and biomass. So I think soil science has a good deal to play in this concept of better understanding not only the soils as such, but their role in this communication also towards policy and decision makers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reinhard Hüttel. I had an interesting experience this summer, which may connect your intervention and the next one. I was traveling through Denmark, coming home to Germany. In Denmark, the dominating color of the landscape was brown, goldish brown, wheat fields. They were ripe, and the Danish farmers were harvesting the wheat day and night. I crossed the border to Germany, and the color changed. The color was green. The dominating color was green. It was corn, fields, many fields of corn. And I thought, why is that so? Why is it brown in Denmark and just across the border? Well, the answer, of course, is that the German policy framework gives strong incentives to farmers to grow corn for energy production, bioenergy. And it has ignited, it has spiked a very lively discussion in Germany, whether that is a good policy or not. Of course, it is part of our national goal here to increase our use of renewable energies. But it has raised questions, and I hope that our next speaker will address some of these questions. The next speaker is Alok Adolaya. He is the director of the Biotechnology and Bioresources Division at TERI in New Delhi, a worldwide well-known institute for particularly focusing also on energy. So I'm very interested in what you are going to say to us.
Well, friends, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity and the chair for the session. Well, I was thinking of making a formal presentation, but I think the discussion have really made me move and think in a direction where I can directly share some of the thoughts that are emerging through the discussions. The important thing which I felt is that the issue of soil, issue of problems related to soils are not coming from anywhere but from us. The man who thinks that we are brilliant and we created solutions, but we first create problems and then we bring the solutions in place, and then we say we are great, brilliant ways of building solutions here. So if we look at soil, and I was thinking that the soil is an issue which we are talking about, facing enormous stresses, difficulties, and then resulting into societal stress, which we are finding in terms of food, energy, and the environment in which we are living, which is not cleaner enough. The biomass-based energy that we are talking about, we have been talking about for ages. We have seen impacts of wood harvesting, which is non-sustainable in many countries at the global level, and that have destroyed soils because the replenishment of nutrient, which is supposed to come after the completion of a cycle, did not happen. Similarly, we use coal as an energy source for producing energy. Of course, it comes from the earth. But the major impact that it brings is the byproduct or the waste product which comes from the combustion of coal while we produce energy. And that goes into ground, creates overburdens. Globally, many countries, and we have large tract of land which is under the coal combusted fly ash, and that poses many problems to soil, movement of heavy metals, movements, the vegetation impacts otherwise, and as well as the human impacts, the health impacts. The solutions to these problems, when we find a good earth moving to these surfaces and reclamation happens. But what we then do, create a wasteland elsewhere. And that's how the understanding of activities or actions becomes very, very important in terms of making a policy framework, making well-discussed decisions which are required to undertake such actions. There are technologies which are available as success stories where these surfaces can be reclaimed biologically. However, these success stories never exchange or never change boundaries and never reach to places where they are very much necessary. And that's what poses me and brings me a point further, that we need to create these knowledge exchanges hubs very, very prominent at the global level. And understanding towards that and importance towards those success stories to become an household knowledge in the regions where they are necessary becomes very important. The other aspect which is very important is that any of these actions needs to be sustainable, and this sustainability does not mean that we are sustaining the surface, but also sustaining economics in order to create these successful examples multiplying on their own. Of course, the transboundary issues, the databases that we are not able to build, and in many countries and the regions which are not allowing us to take the negotiations, the global negotiations at the right path, is also very important. And I agree with my fellow panelists that research and understanding in soil is also very much necessary and important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alok. Our next panelist is Lothar Hövelmann, and he is the Managing Director of the Competence Center for Agriculture at the German Agricultural Society. It is an organization of farmers, for farmers in Germany. So he is very close to the German farming community that, of course, uses and works on the soil in Germany. And I wonder if he can tell us a little bit about the approach of German farmers to the soil, to the Nexus, and how good are really, how much concerned are the German farmers about protecting or improving the soils, particularly on the background of the various comments that we've heard today, that Germany as a country and as a member of the European Union is a bit reluctant to embrace the approach that the European Commission has proposed. So I invite you, Mr. Hövermann, to come to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like first give some information about German Agricultural Society, what we do. We are a self-helping organization from farmers for farmers. We have almost 25,000 farmers in our organization, mostly in Germany. But we have very big international activities. We live on three kinds of activities. One is organizing agricultural trade fairs here in Germany, in Hanover, world-leading trade fairs, but also international. So therefore we have a quite good international approach. The second is we are testing farm equipment, and that means we are testing machinery or testing equipment for animal husbandry. And I can tell you that throughout the testing schemes for the agricultural machinery, the aspects which lead to soil protection, they are gaining more and more gravity in the schemes. And the last thing of the three things we do is we are doing application-oriented research, and this is my part in the DLG, and to educate farmers, to raise the skills of the farmers for different approaches. I would like to state one very important point, is that Professor Loll, you mentioned a lack of transparency in your summarize, and I think a farmer has a lack of transparency when it comes to soil protection. Professor Hüttel mentioned the different functions soil has, and the farmer is on the first hand concentrated on the production function. He has to get a good harvest, and he has in the first hand no real transparency what is with his soil, how is the soil, how are the soil properties. And from my experience, I can say that there is a rising awareness on the side of the farmers on soil physical conditions, on soil compaction, soil erosion in the last 15 years. Farmers more and more are on the way to change their habit to the soil, to think themselves of being a steward for the soil. So 50% of the of the land in Germany is tilled by farmers or cultivated by farmers, and more and more it comes to the attitude that the farmers should be more aware of soil protecting, because we farmers think that we have a threefold attitude on the topic. First, we are part of the solution. Of course, we have many technologies which can help soil in good conditions, but second, we are also part of the problem, because we sometimes have it's not so easy to decide getting the harvest from the fields, even if the soil condition is not in a way that the combiners would not produce soil compaction. So it's a little bit conflict in the targets. And the third point is that also a farmer suffers from poor soil conditions, because the harvest, the yield is not so high if the soil is in a very good condition. So I would like to make the point in my last minute that there is a rising awareness in the farmers on soil protection, and therefore farmers, we implemented a very broad scheme of research comparing different tillage systems, soil-conserving tillage systems, the old traditional plowing system, and strip tillage system, the different tillage systems which have different approaches to the soil, different compaction, different erosion, different productive functions. And this is a very long run now. We implemented 2 years ago, and the farmers urged us to go into the details and to go into to raise more knowledge what has the impact, what different impacts have the different systems of plowing and not plowing on soil physical properties, and of course on plant development characteristics. So that was my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lothar Hövelmann. And our last panelist is Yaya Olaniran, well known in Rome and well known in Berlin. He is the permanent representative of Nigeria to the UN food agencies based in Rome. And he is a crop scientist by training. I think you have the opportunity to really bring a global perspective from Rome, a global perspective to our discussion. I know that you Perm reps, when you come to your organization, you bring your country's perspective, right? That's your mandate. But when you go outside the organization, you bring the global perspective. I think that's a very good thing, a very good combination that you can bring to us. And I'm sure you will be concerned, like most of the organizations in Rome, with food security globally, and particularly in those countries where food security is a challenge. Of course, food security is threatened in areas where we have overlapping scarcities of land and water, and these are regions in Africa particularly, but also in Asia and Latin America. So I'm very interested to hear your perspective, please. Mm-hmm.
Good evening. I walked the way I did just to demonstrate something. We have to go back to the basics. I went there, down, and then I came up. If we don't go back to basics, soil, water, and energy will not be where it should be. Some of my colleagues said that we created the problem. We must fix it now. And the sooner we fix it, the better. Let me thank the organizers of this conference. This year is better than last year. And I'm sure next year and 20 years' time will be better than the previous ones. But we have a challenge, and that is starting late. Having just left the seat of the World Food Security, I realized that multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary, and multi-approach system consumes time. And therefore, we have to hurry gently. In our hearts, we want to take care of the lost time. Please, let's do it in a systematic, strategic way. Otherwise, we will send out the wrong signals, and that will set us back the more. Let's look at all the different activities going on with respect to soil, water, and energy. and re-evaluate, re-emphasize the importance of soil in all this. Soil is the incubator of eggs for many organisms and the hatch. Soil is the incubator of compost. And if we use it correctly, we can get energy out of it because of the methane that it emits. Soil gives us fertilizer if we allow it to do it its own way, and at the same time, increase the structure, which is the health of the soil. Now, it also gives us the nutrition we need. We have done a few things wrongly. Of the 7,000 foodstuffs in the world, we have concentrated only on 30. And to make matters worse, we only cultivate only about 5. Wheat, rice, maize, potatoes, and soybean. Where does that leave us? When there's any problem with the weather, when these crops don't get enough, they sneeze and we all catch cold. And the price fluctuation comes in, and governments are ruined, lives are ruined, and people commit suicide. This should not be the way we should go. Putting on my other hat, Nigeria is an interesting country. At one end, you have the mangrove forests bordering the Atlantic Ocean. At the other end, you have the Sahara Desert coming in. At the mangrove forest end, introduced Napier palms are fibrous roots, and they're taking away the soils, the mangrove being destroyed, and we're losing grounds. How do we intensify that? Don't let us also forget that in the soil, we have geothermal energy. Can't we annex that? The wind erosion, the water erosion can also be sources of energy. So they are all interrelated, they're intertwined. And for us to really go the way we ought to go, let's face it, everybody should be on board, from the policymakers to be properly educated. You have to use the farmers, the different indigenous knowledge, indigenous cultivars, and of course, go back to mixed farming. Animals, plants, and let everything work together as the Almighty God in His wisdom made it before we started tampering with it. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Yaya, also for this statement. We've now heard the threat ambassadors, we've heard the panelists. We have now some time left for questions. And after the questions, I would like to ask all our panelists to make a very brief final statement, also answering to the questions. If you have questions, this is your time now. We don't have too much time, so at some point I will need to cut off. But please, if you can, address your question to a particular panelist. If you don't, the panelists are free then to pick them up, the questions in their final statement. This is your time now for a question. I saw a hand here.
Fátima Moreira, Brazil. My question is for the representative of farmers. You mentioned that you noticed that is increasing awareness about the soil physical conditions of soil. I would like to know if there is also increasing awareness about the importance of soil organisms for sustainability.
Thank you, and please note the questions. You have the opportunity to respond to that in your final statement. Okay. Any other questions? I'm sure there are questions. Yes, Professor Lahan.
The comments were Ania about soil and water, and I thought you did a great job. But what I wanted to mention was that 4 types of water: green, blue, gray, virtual. They are all linked through soil. And the conversion of blue to green and gray to green and optimizing virtual water use is also through soil. So that's an important nexus.
Thank you for pointing that out. More questions? Yes, please.
Hi, I just have a question.
Can you introduce yourself?
Sure,
briefly?
Teresia Ott from Richards Bay Minerals, Rio Tinto. I just have a question. I've heard bioenergy being mentioned a couple of times today, and perhaps it was addressed in one of the sessions that I didn't attend. But I just want to ask, what about the threat to biodiversity in terms of biofuels and using biomass production? Often this leads to huge monocultures, as yourself mentioned, and I'd just like to address that perhaps to Alok, and Reinhard also mentioned it, if we can talk about biodiversity.
Do you want to address that to any particular person?
Yeah, Alok and Reinhard both mentioned.
Okay. More questions? Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Fonso is my name, from Cameroon, and the Global Water Partnership, my question is directed to you on the issue of disaster risk management with communities and vulnerability. I think I find this part more interesting, and probably if you want to throw 1 or 2 more light on that. Coming from Cameroon, which also is as diverse as Nigeria, with the mangroves in the Atlantic coast, but also in the north, where we have the Lake Chad Basin, the Lake Chad Basin being threatened also with desertification, and the northern part suffering from flood at the same time, of too much water at the same time. After 3 months, we are again into very, very critical dry conditions. If you want to throw more light on this issue of disaster risk management.
Mm-hmm. Is that addressed to any particular person? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, Professor Lahan.
I wanted to mention the comment about transparency that Lothar mentioned also. The societal value of soil carbon in trading purposes is not very transparent. I think that's an example. The cost of carbon capture and storage and then pumping into the ground is about $600 to $800 per ton of CO2. The cost in trading under best circumstances is only $20. In the worst case, it's 10 cents. That's an example of lack of transparency.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Thanks. Just briefly, several of the presenters touched upon the question of the importance of governance in the Nexus. At the same time, Liesl brought the famous term political will to our attention. And I was wondering whether Joan, from her experience in the African Land Policy Initiative, can tell us a little bit more of how to make this famous political will come about, or any other panelist, if he or she feels inclined to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are there any other questions? It's late in the day, so we are getting tired. I don't see any other request for the microphone. So, as for the final round, I would like to invite the panelists to very briefly draw their conclusion in 3 or 4 sentences from our meeting here, and respond to the questions that we've heard. Can we begin with you, Anna?
Okay, thank you.
We can hear you.
You
have.
yes. Right. Okay, there were some excellent comments made. I'm not sure that I subscribe to all these different colors of water, but blue, green, gray. Indeed, there's also black water, which is also mediated by soil, like if you use wetlands to remediate black water, virtual water, absolutely. But to me, perhaps the most critical thing of all is aquifers, which is the hidden resource. And of course, aquifers are mediated through the soil. And the quality of the aquifer is hugely dependent on what's happening and the amount of filtration that's possible, the permeability of the soil, and so on. I don't want to go into technical issues, but to respond to the drought risk management, the Lake Chad issue, again, a looming tragedy of the commons there, perhaps. I think that there are many disaster-related issues, disaster risk management around soils, to do with landslides, to do with dust storms, and this is perhaps an area which could really be stressed. As I said, that link to the disaster risk management community could be a useful one. Just to sum up then, I think what this community has done is you've identified a governance gap that even Europe is not addressing. And this is such an urgent governance gap. This soil is the unrecognized resource. So please, find those messages, get those messages through. I think what you're doing here is absolutely essential. And anything that we can do to help from the side of the Global Water Partnership, we'll be very happy to do to support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I would like to briefly address the question on bioenergy. You are right, and I tried to give a hint. We were very optimistic in the beginning, particularly seeing biomass also in the context of renewable energies and changing from fossil or nuclear-based energy towards renewable energy-based energy system. When you take all the pros and cons into consideration, then you become a little bit more reluctant what, for instance, biofuels are concerned. Particularly, as the chairman mentioned, in Germany, it's corn or maize production. And if you don't have changes in the crops that you plant, so if you have corn year after year after year, you have severe problems with the soil, at least on specific soil types. So it's not the same all over, but so I would agree, and this would also include, of course, questions of biomass, of biodiversity, particularly related to microorganisms, for instance, or soil biology, microbiology. My final comment would be, and this is related to what Ratan Lal said, the societal importance of soils in terms of soil carbon is not understood and has to be made much more transparent. And I believe in this concept of the critical zone, because that brings together many aspects. And as I'm now running our national lab on geosciences, I see the interrelations much more clearly to relate it towards even the deeper soil, or let's say the deeper ground. Because when we use the underground, for instance, for shale gas or things like this, you have not just the sweet water, the aquifers, but you have the saline water aquifers interacting. So I really think, and this is true for the gases and so forth, so I think this is something that we have to look much more. So from my point of view, it also means advancing soil science towards geoscience in this context, and that would easily link, for instance, catastrophic aspects also in the conscience of, because we work with landslides and dust storms and things like that.
First of all, I would like to address the question of bioenergy, particularly the reference of biodiversity impacts because of the bioenergy. I would tend to agree that when we have a monoculture proposition, we do impact biodiversity. However, that's unavoidable at the moment because we also need energy for our existence. The important thing is that if we are growing anything which is replenishing or providing what is taken from the soil, I think still we are doing much better in terms of bringing the soil into not to under stress. And more we avoid chemicals, more we use biological systems are more useful, because at least the diversity below ground is not impacted if even the above ground diversity is affected. My final comment would be that it is, I think the forum like this are looking for achieving a situation where we are able to recognize that soil is necessary for the human race continued existence. And I think if every government in this world is able to recognize this and create a ministry on the soils, probably the purpose will be served. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes. The colleague from Brazil puts a question, is there a raising awareness also for soil flora and soil fauna on the sides of farmers? I would say it depends on the size of the microorganisms. Or there is no big awareness for small microorganisms, because farmers are not used to go very much into the microsphere. But there is a rising awareness for earthworms, because earthworms and their activity is very strong connected to the soil physical properties. So there is a good awareness to that, but not to microorganisms, as I can see it. My last comment or my last statement should lead to German farmers' perspective mostly, and I would like to say what are the most problems, the biggest problems we have going to the soil. That is soil erosion and soil compaction on the first hand. On the second hand, of course, and I have to put my own nose, we farmers have to work on reduction of the surplus of the nitrogen balance. We have in Germany a nitrogen balance surplus around 100 kilograms per hectare and a year. It differs per year, but we have to work on more efficiency to get this surplus on a lower level, which is sustainable. This 100 kilogram per hectare and a year is not sustainable. And the last point is, I think there is much data and much knowledge about what are the effects of our tilling or dealing with the ground. We know if we make wrong measurements on the ground, we have this or that effects. So it is more, the plan to action should be more on the way of education, raising awareness, and giving the farmers more skills to implement the good technologies which exist for making a sustainable production.
Thank you. I think first of all, we have to intensify what we are doing with respect to reducing food waste in Europe, for instance, reducing farm gate produce waste. In doing that, we will indirectly save our soils if we put in all the other necessary health mechanism that the soil requires, like increasing the organic matter, less impact of machinery and all that. It's been said that the smallholder holds the key for future food security. I want to believe that that should in fact be put in the hands of women and youth, particularly in the developing countries, and help them to remove the drudgery of agriculture and food production. Of course, the value chain issue is there. But you cannot produce effective value chain if you don't have the energy to do it, that is the electricity to improve primary products to final products. Political will, it has to come from heads of governments, for instance, as it is done in the private sector. The head of the organization dictates the tune. If he's interested, he'll make everybody comply and do it the way it's prescribed by all the experts. Political will, and then there should be also political followership. It's no use having a policy, being well articulated, and when, because of the political landscape, there's a change in government, that policy is either sidetracked or dropped. And that makes it very inconsistent. And we have to look at that from the prism of wanting to help the soil or the land in which we are working. A lot has been said about land tenure. However, I want to conclude by saying the soil, water, and energy nexus could be positively used to advantage both politically and in terms of improving livelihood. No soil, no food security, no nutrition, no poverty alleviation will lead to world insecurity, and we all can see it already. So I think if we can come out of this meeting with recommendation that will put up that red flag for the world leaders to see, then maybe they can be jolted into action. Thank you.
We are at the end of this plenary, and I think we've heard a very rich discussion with many facets. I think it has been a very good example, like the entire day, a very good example of an interdisciplinary discussion. We've had so many aspects. Unfortunately, well, of course, we all want to be interdisciplinary, and unfortunately it has a downside. The downside is that we are now seeing so many more linkages, so many more nexus aspects, so many more knots, that we may get confused, where are the priorities, where should the focus be? Well, that's the bad news. The good news is this always happens on day one of such a conference. But there is a day 2, and there is day 3, and there is day 4. So I'm very confident that we will be able to focus more with the help of all the good, wise participants here. So at the end of this session, let me first thank the thread ambassadors. You're not done yet. This was just day 1. We will need you further in this conference. I would like to thank all the panelists for coming here, for giving us their views. And I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this plenary so well, and for organizing the entire day, which I think was a very good day. So with this, I'm closing the session, and I'm wishing you a good evening. Thank you very much.